Welcome to By the Well podcast, produced by the community at Wall Street United Methodist Church in Jeffersonville, Indiana. We focus on clarity, compassion, and community. You will hear sermons as well as conversations around the intersections of faith and life. If you enjoy this podcast, like and share below.
Our first reading is from Revelation chapter 5, verses 11 through 14. Then I looked, and I heard the voice of many angels surrounding the throne, and the living creatures and the elders. They numbered myriads, and thousands of thousands, singing with full voice, "Worthy is the Lamb that was slaughtered, to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing." Then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and in the sea and all that is in them, singing, "To the one seated on the throne, to the Lamb, to blessing and honor and glory and might forever and ever." And the four living creatures said, "Amen." And the elders fell down and worshiped. From John chapter 21, verses 1 through 19, and feel free to sit down if you get too tired of standing during this. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I am going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" And they answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put out on his garment, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came to the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far behind from the land, only about 100 yards off. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there, with fish on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled a net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now, none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This is now the third time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, son of John, "Do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to them, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend to my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he had said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and go wherever you wished. But when you grow old and you stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you might not wish to go. He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. After this, he said to him, "Follow me." The word of God for the people of God.
So friends, this Eastertide, we are living into freedom during our worship services. We're asking that question of if the resurrection has set us free from the power of sin and death, what does that mean for us, especially as we continue to live in a world where death still exists and where sin still has power, even in our own lives. So how do we live into the freedom of being set free? So this season of deepening discipleship, we're exploring what that means to live into that freedom that God has given us in and through the resurrected Jesus, the risen Christ. And we began last week with what I called one of the foundational freedoms that God has given us in the risen Christ, and that's the freedom to doubt. But remember, I said it's not about what one scholar said, raw intellectual assent. It's about relationship. It's in terms of relationship. In other words, we are free to have absolutely nothing to do with the resurrected Jesus. And so this week we are looking at another foundational freedom. I might say it's sort of a companion to last week's freedom to choose to have nothing to do with the risen Jesus. And this is the freedom to choose to have something to do with the risen Jesus. Maybe everything to do with the risen Jesus. In the resurrection, we are given the freedom to follow the one who has risen. And you say, but Kathy, we already are, right? Aren't we already disciples? Aren't we already following Jesus? I mean, certainly these 7 people that Jesus encounters on that beach were disciples, right? They were followers of Jesus. Certainly Peter was a follower of Jesus. They had followed Jesus before the crucifixion and the resurrection. They were already followers, weren't they? I mean, Peter himself had followed Jesus into the very courtyards of danger, right? Into the front yard of the house of people who were seeking to hurt Jesus, to kill Jesus. Peter followed them right in. And then Peter found himself right in the middle of all of this danger, and then right then Peter chose, that's enough right there. That's enough right there. I can't follow any farther. Right? He decided, and I don't know why, he decided that the cost of following Jesus any further was too high. And so in 3 separate conversations, Peter denies Jesus. But I'm indebted to the Reverend Dr. Caroline Lewis, who puts it a different way. She says, in the courtyards of danger, in the courtyards of the powers of this world, Peter denies his discipleship of Jesus. Right? So when Jesus is arrested, when he's brought into the courtyards of power, Peter doesn't deny who Jesus is. He doesn't say, there's no way that guy is the Messiah. He doesn't say, you ought to kill that guy. He doesn't say, you should do something about it. He doesn't deny who Jesus is. Instead, what does he say? He says, I don't know him. And in John's gospel, it's recorded this way. The woman said to Peter, aren't you also one of the man's disciples? And he said, I'm not. They asked him, you are also one of his disciples, aren't you? He denied it and said, I am not. One of the slaves of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, didn't I see you in the garden with him? Guy who cut off my cousin's ear? And Peter said, no. Again, Peter denied it. In other words, what Peter was saying over and over again is, I don't follow Jesus. I don't follow Jesus. And we don't know why he says it in this moment. Is it a scary situation? Absolutely. I think they probably had been in scary situations before. Is it dangerous? Absolutely. I think they had probably been in dangerous situations before. But whatever it is, in this context, there's something that leads Peter to say, and whether he realizes that that's what he's saying or not, causes him to say, this right here is too much. I cannot follow any farther. I am done. And we do that too. Now, we may not be in the heart of empire. We may not be in a courtyard surrounded by people who seek to end our lives, but we every day make decisions, consciously or unconsciously, that is too far to go in following Jesus. We don't want to go that way. We don't want to have to give up that thing. We don't want to have to surrender that control. We follow, but do we follow everywhere? Do we follow in all circumstances? Do we follow on the way to all people? Or are there frankly times when we decide we're just not going to do it that way? And then maybe we find ourselves going back to the way we used to do things, right? Maybe they're comfortable, maybe they're familiar. When Jesus is taking us in a way we don't want to go, we often go back to the ways that we're comfortable with. Now, we don't really know why Peter said, I'm going fishing that day, right? There's lots of reasons why he could. Yes, he has denied his discipleship. But this is also after he's run to the empty tomb. He has already seen the risen Christ at least 2 times before this. So maybe he's going fishing to ponder all that's happened over the last 2 weeks. Steve, do you do some of your best daydreaming thinking when you're out fishing? Yeah, right? Right? There are sometimes those of us who love to be in nature, those of us who sometimes you go for a walk because you want to go for a walk, and sometimes you go for a walk because there is stuff on your mind and you got to think about it. Right? So maybe that's what he did. Maybe he thinks, well, I certainly blew that job interview. I no longer have that responsibility of being a disciple. I no longer have the privileges. I'm not going to be able to do that job anymore, so I might as well go back to the job that I know, which is fishing. Maybe fishing was what was comfortable. Maybe he was sad. Maybe he was sorry. Maybe he was hungry. Maybe he was just bored. We don't know why he's gone fishing, but what we can see and what we can say about this passage is that John gives us a beautiful recalling story. Now, it's a recalling story because it intentionally recalls, remembers, reminds us about the ministry of Jesus. We hear echoes, don't we, of the first calling of the disciples. It's interesting, in that list of who is here fishing with Peter, one of the disciples named is Nathaniel. Do you know the only other time Nathaniel is mentioned in the Gospel of John is when he's called at the beginning? So we have 2 call stories, right? He's remembering that. We have a recalling of the first calling. We also have a recalling of the first sign in John's Gospel. What was the first sign of who Jesus was in John's Gospel? I hear some of it. Water into wine at the wedding of Cana, right? Right? So here is an example of Jesus providing more and better than what we need, right? I don't think that those 7 disciples needed 153 fish for breakfast that morning, right? But here is God giving more than they need. And it also, of course, recalls those miracles of abundance, those miracles where Jesus has revealed himself in the sharing of food, right? The feeding of the 5,000. It's been said that you can't read anything in John's Gospel without referring to other things in John's Gospel. It's this beautiful, rich literary work. And so what all of these callbacks, all of these recallings in this story do is help us, as they help Peter and the disciples, to recall, to remember who it is that they follow. And this, of course, is a recalling story because Jesus calls Peter, and he's calling the others too, but of course the focus is on Peter. He calls Peter again. But this is a new call, or perhaps it's a call that Peter can hear or understand differently on this side of the resurrection. So Peter is no longer called to be a fisher of men, which incidentally John never says. That's in Matthew and Mark, right? But John kind of assumes that we are familiar with the stories of some of the other Gospels, right? So instead of being called now to be a fisher of men, Jesus is now calling Peter to be a good shepherd. And this is another callback, of course, to earlier in John, because Jesus is the good shepherd. And what does that look like? I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me. I lay it down of my own accord. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. And now, what do we hear Jesus calling Peter to do? Feed my lambs. Tend my sheep. Feed my sheep. Follow me. Jesus is saying, follow me and be a good shepherd. Now, in a few minutes, we will be celebrating the sacrament of Holy Communion together. Here's another interesting thing. Did you know that the institution of the sacrament of Holy Communion is not in John's Gospel? Right? So, in the Great Thanksgiving, we'll pray on the night in which he gave himself up for us. Jesus took bread, gave thanks, broke the bread, gave it to his disciples, and said, "Take, eat, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." When the supper was over, he took the cup, gave thanks, gave it to his disciples, and said, "Drink from this, all of you. This is my blood of the new covenant, poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me." And none of that is in John's account of the Last Supper. So again, John assumes familiarity with other stories of Jesus. John's gospel comes later, and so he assumes that you know some of the stories, that maybe you're part of these communities that engage in this communion and this liturgy. But because he assumes that familiarity, John is able to focus on other things. And so in John's account of the Last Supper, we have what we now call the farewell discourse. And this is Jesus' longest, most in-depth teaching to his disciples. He's preparing them for his death. He's preparing them for the kind of discipleship that he's calling them to later. He's preparing them for being his body later. It does institute a new commandment, but it's the commandment to wash each other's feet. And it's the commandment to love each other the way he loved them. And in the farewell discourse, Jesus says this: "I have many other things to tell you, but you cannot bear them now." I don't know that Peter could bear to be called a good shepherd before the resurrection. I don't know that Peter could have understood that a good shepherd does nourish and heal the flock, right? He'd seen Jesus do that throughout his ministry, nourish and heal. But I don't think he understood what it means that a good shepherd cares for a flock by guiding them through the valley of the shadow of death. I don't know that he understood that a good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. I don't know that he could have imagined what it would be to lay down your life and to be able to pick life up again on behalf of the people you were called to care for. I don't think Peter could have done any of that in that courtyard But what Peter could do is hear it from the risen one who had showed him what that looks like. I can be a good shepherd because the good shepherd has shown me what to do and how to do it. Peter couldn't bear the call before, and Jesus knew that. He understood that. But Jesus is setting Peter free to be called again, to hear better, to understand more fully his call, and now Peter is free to follow. So, if you remember none of anything that I've said, here's what I want you to take with you around the altar as we share communion together. I invite you to live into the freedom to follow. You've been given the freedom to follow by the risen Christ. And perhaps we start by pondering these questions. How do you recall your discipleship, your call to ministry? How do you remember your call to follow Jesus? As you encounter the risen Christ at communion, in conversation with your friends, how do you hear this call differently now than you did before? What does discipleship look like for you now? Maybe it is a deepening and an enriching of what you're already doing. Maybe you are to become even more a fisher of men. And maybe now you are called to be a good shepherd. So what does discipleship look like now? And what call to discipleship can you bear now that you could not bear before? What do you need to try or to do? Where do you need to go? Who do you need to be with to live into your freedom to follow? Let us ponder that together at the meal Jesus has prepared for us.
You have been listening to By the Well podcast from Wall Street United Methodist Church. Thank you for being part of our community. Just a reminder to visit us at wallstreetumc.org, and we invite you to like and share our podcast wherever you listen.